Hola, ¿qué tal amigos de Red Latina? Estamos muy contentos celebrando el mes de la herencia hispana en estos tiempos de pandemia. Es importante lo que vamos a ver el día de hoy y tenemos invitados de lujo, entre ellos está Ness Sandoval, a quien le voy a pedir de veras, le voy a dar un agradecimiento enorme. Él es uno de los estadistas más importantes que tenemos de la comunidad hispana aquí en el área de Missouri, en San Luis, de la Universidad de San Luis, y nos va a presentar precisamente cuál es la estadística, quiénes somos, dónde estamos, cuántos somos. Y con ustedes, bueno, pues aquí les presento a nuestro querido Ness Sandoval. How are you, Ness?
I'm doing good. Thank you for inviting me today.
No, thank you. The information that you always have for all of us, really important for the community. So definitely, this studio is all yours, and you let us know when we started, because you have a great presentation, demographic profile, Latino and immigrant in San Luis, Missouri.
Great. So I will talk between 15 and 20 minutes.
Sure.
If you have questions, that's fine. But I'll try to keep it about 15 to 20 minutes, okay?
Cool.
So today I'm talking about the demographic profile of Latinos and immigrants in St. Louis and Missouri, the past, present, and future. So essentially we'll have 5 insights. I'm going to present a lot of statistics. One is demography's destiny. I'll talk about how important population curves are to understand the future. We'll talk a little bit about demographic and economic transitions. We'll talk a little bit about Latino immigrants, because oftentimes people confuse Latinos and immigrants, and they're 2 different populations. And we'll talk about the spatial concentration of Latinos and immigrants in St. Louis. So one of the things I'd like to talk about is the first principle of demography. And so the great principle of demography is that demographic transitions will happen even if people refuse to believe or acknowledge the demographic trends or facts. So I hear a lot of people talking about how we can change demography if we change policies and things like that. The reality is demography is built on 3 transitions: mortality, fertility, and migration. 2 of those are biological. And so regardless of what you believe, we'll have a sense of what's going to happen to this country simply based on fertility and mortality. Migration is often impacted by policy, and so we'll talk a bit about that as well. But we know what's happening is that the United States is becoming more and more diverse, and it's extremely diverse when we look at our children. Right now, about 49% of our children are white and 51% are people of color. So in 20, 25 years from now, when these children become young adults and start having children, the majority of the mothers are going to be people of color. And so we can see the United States changing based on what our youth look like today. So what has happened since 2000 census is about 92% of the growth at the United States has come from racial minorities, and the largest share of that growth is from Latinos. And we see here in St. Louis, 53% of the growth came from minorities, and it was equally divided between African Americans and Latinos. So that was 2000 to 2010. What's happened since 2010 is in the United States, now 94% of the growth is from racial minorities, and half of that growth is coming from Latinos. Here in St. Louis, 100% of our growth is from Latinos, Asians, and other minorities. And we see a decline in the white population, and we see a decline in the Black population in the region. And so we can see that Latinos are playing a very important role in terms of contributing to the growth of not only the United States, but to the St. Louis metropolitan region in general. If we look at the latest census that came out, we see that since 2014, the Black population has experienced a decline in population. And we see the latest numbers that came out a few weeks ago, the new population shows a further decline for African Americans. However, if we look at the Latino population, we see that it's gradually increasing every year since 2005. And this past year, it's experienced about a 4,000 resident increase from 2018 to 2019. So we can see that for the region, it's positive growth for Latinos. If we look at immigration in the United States, we can see that immigration was increasing at a steady rate. And then under the current administration, under the new policies to restrict immigration, we can see beginning in 2017, 18, and 19, immigration has basically come to a stop. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means for St. Louis. So this is the trends for the foreign-born population for Missouri. And we can see that since 2010, there was an increase. But then around 2011, there were a series of anti-immigration bills that were introduced. And so we saw a decline in the state population. But since 2014, there's been a gradual increase in the foreign-born population for Missouri. About half of the population are naturalized citizens, and the other half are non-U.S. citizens, typically students, refugees, or they could be laborers who are working as an H-1B visa or things like that. And then we see, just to give you a sense of how diverse the Latino population is, we can see that about 70%, 69% in Missouri is of Mexican origin. But if you go to Jeff City, we see that 78%, Kansas City, 77%. If we look here at St. Louis, it's 65%. We see a larger population of Puerto Rican origin. And then we see a larger Central American and South American population here in the region compared to, for example, Jefferson City and Kansas City. So again, the Latino population is a pan-ethnic group made of from different ethnic origins throughout Central and South America. One of the characteristics and themes I'm going to be highlighting in today's presentation is how young the Latino population is. This is the median age for Missouri, it's 38.2. But we see for Latinos, it's almost a 13-year difference in median age. Columbia, Jefferson, you see that pattern all along these key cities in Missouri. So I'm going to come back to this point in another chart. Again, so I brought this point up earlier. So this is the percent increase for the St. Louis metropolitan region. And this is the 2018 number. The new numbers show a slight decline in the foreign-born population for the 2019 data. So one of the things that we look at to try to get a sense of what the future looks like is what we call population pyramids. These are population curves. And what each of these horizontal bars represents is an age cohort. And so this is 0 to 4 cohort here. This is 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and every row is 5 years until we get to 85 plus. And so we see here the differences in the age cohorts for whites and blacks. And so we see that for the black population, the largest cohort is going to be this cohort. This is a very young cohort. But for the white population, we see that it's typically the 50 to 54, 55 to 59 cohorts that are the largest cohorts that are there. And we see for the, compared to the Asian population, you have a lot more younger adults. These are typically parents, and then these are their children here. But what we see here with the Latino population, something that's very different. The two largest cohorts are 0 to 4 and 5 to 9 of the Latino population. So in 5 years from now, they're going to be coming up. In 10 years, they keep moving up and up. And the same is going to be true for the white population, right? So in 20 years from now, we'll see these two cohorts moving up this ladder. And so the white population is getting older and older, and the Latino population is going to become college students, young parents, and they're going to have children. And so we're going to continue to see this increase in the Latino population that are there. So this is not unique to St. Louis. We see this happening in just about every major American city in the United States. The largest cohorts for Latinos are 0 to 4 and 5 to 9. In fact, the differences are the age differences when we compare the two groups is between Latino and white. We have some cities in Missouri where the difference is 0.45, which means that you have a very, very old white population and a very, very young Latino population. That difference, you can see the differences that are there. So the bigger the differences here, the more gap there is between the age cohorts. And so that's something we want to keep an eye out for. So as I mentioned, Latino is a pan-ethnic category, and so it's made up of very different groups. And so we can see that the largest group that comprises the Latino category is individuals of Mexican origin, about 53,000, followed by Puerto Ricans, and then it's followed by all other Hispanic. The fourth category, Spaniard, then Cuban, Guatemalan, Colombian, Honduran, and so forth. So you get a sense of all the different groups that contribute to the category Latino. So we have to use the 5-year estimate, so we'll get our new numbers in December. If we look at the top foreign-born population in the region, we see that it's a statistical tie right now. The largest foreign-born population right now is India, followed closely by the Mexican foreign-born population. And it's really a difference of about 100 people. So we're going to look at the new data that comes out in December to see if the difference is going to go away or if it's actually widening. One thing to point out, that if the Indian population continues to grow and outnumber the Mexican population, that would be a pretty significant change. In most American cities, the Mexican foreign-born population is the largest foreign-born population, but there are a handful of cities, about 15, where the Mexican foreign-born population is not the largest population. And so if we want to pay close attention to this, because if the Indian population continues to outgrow the Mexican foreign-born population, then St. Louis will be part of that handful of cities. So we have to ask the question, why aren't the Mexican foreign-born populations coming to St. Louis? We see a small increase. I'll show you here in just a minute, but nothing compared to the Indian foreign-born that's living here. So if we look back to 2010, we would see that the Mexican foreign-born population was the largest at 13,700. And then it was the Indian population, 11,000. And again, you can see the Mexican population did increase, but not that much. But we see a significant increase in the Indian population, and also a very sizable increase in the Chinese population. So we'll have to see what the numbers tell us in December, the implications of the policy restrictions from the administration, but also COVID and how it's been able to have an impact on population trends. In terms of the percent increase, I think this is going to change, but during this time period, immigrants from China saw the largest percent increase, followed by India and Mexico, which only experienced an 8% increase. Because of the restrictions that are placed on both of these countries are, in fact, I think the new numbers coming out in December and coming out next December will probably show a very significant decline in immigrants especially from China, coming into the St. Louis region. So let me talk a little bit about Latino migration. So if we look at the new data that's available to us, we can see that 66% of Latinos in the United States are native-born residents. So these are American-born individuals. About 34% of the population are foreign-born, and we can able to break that up. 13% of all Latinos are foreign-born citizens, and 21% are foreign-born non-citizens. If we look at St. Louis, we actually have a higher percentage of the population that is American-born. That's at 71%, and then 9.7% is foreign-born citizens, and 20.2% are foreign-born non-citizens. So I think the point I would like to leave you with is, and I hear this a lot, people use Latino and immigration interchangeably, and in fact, they're not. Especially here in the St. Louis region, when we want to think of the typical Latino in St. Louis is an American-born citizen. And then if we combine the foreign-born citizens, more than about 3 out of 4 Latinos are actually citizens here in the region. We can do this for all the different ethnic groups. So we can do this for Mexican, Cuban, and we can see that the majority of Mexicans and Cubans are American-born citizens. It's really when you get to the Central American population, South American population, is where you get a larger percentage of the population that's foreign-born. Where the population coming from? And so we know that about 1 out of 3 Latinos were born and raised and live in St. Louis. And so you have people like myself who are migrants to the region. And so I'm coming from Chicago. We know that there are a lot of people from Chicago who are relocating to St. Louis. So about 8% of the growth that we're seeing is from the Midwest. 4% is coming from Northeast, New York, Boston. 9% is coming from the South, Houston, Texas, Phoenix, and 9% is coming from the rest, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. And then this is our immigrant population based on the data that's there. Again, it kind of varies based on what ethnic group we're looking at. And so this gives you a pretty good indication of the different experiences for Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Guatemalan, Honduran, Colombian, and Peruvian. Were they born? Did they migrate, and how many are foreign-born that are there? Just a quick note that you'll see here for Puerto Rican, 1% are foreign-born. And these are Puerto Ricans who typically are born in Europe or in Asia, typically with the military. And so they are classified as American citizens, but they were born in another country, not necessarily Puerto Rico or the United States. Then finally, I'm now getting close on my time here. We'll talk about the spatial distribution of where Latinos live. So if we look here, 60% of Latino population lived in St. Louis City or St. Louis County in 1980. And so that would be here. And the numbers here represent the raw numbers that are there. 24% of Latinos lived in St. Louis City in 1980, if you just wanted to look at the city itself. So this was the core here. You can see in St. Charles, it was 949 residents that are there. Fast forward, if we look at 2016 data, we see that 49% of the Latino population live in St. Louis City or St. Louis County. And you can see that in the St. Louis County, it's 27,000 Latinos. Look at St. Charles County, almost close to 12,000 Latinos, matching almost the city here. So remember, look at the difference that was there. 949 to 5531. And if we look, St. Charles County has been able to close that gap. And probably when the new data comes out, there'll be more Latinos living in St. Charles County compared to St. Louis City when the new data comes out in December. But the majority still live in St. Louis County here. In terms of the percent increase, so there's a 249% increase in the Latino population for the region. But you can see St. Charles County had over a 500% increase. Lincoln, Warren, Clinton, and Boone all experienced that. But in terms of just sheer numbers, we can see the massive increase out in St. Charles County. And then we can see the increase here in St. Louis County and St. Louis City that are there. So pretty important numbers that are emerging. So back to the 5 points that I started this talk with is demography's destiny. So we know that the U.S. and St. Louis population is changing at a rapid pace. And this change comes from births and comes from mortality. And so if we simply look at the births that are there, I provide one anecdote to bring this story home. What's happening today in Texas and California is simply based on the number of births compared to the number of deaths. A region of 3 million residents is being created in the state of Texas and the state of California. That's going to be 100% Latino. Net increase. I mean, once you take the number of Latino babies born minus the number of Latinos that are dying, 2 major metropolitan regions are going to be created over the next 30 years. One in Texas and one in California. Now, all those Latinos are not going to stay in Texas, Latinos. They're going to be moving to other cities, going to school. And that's besides the fact of Latinos who are currently living there. So our demography is changing very fast. The Latino population will continue to grow. And I think one thing that's been very clear is that we see that the immigrant population is slowing down. And I think a lot of people are surprised, like, well, why is the Mexican population still, or the Latino population still growing? Because the Latino population is, a lot of its growth, the majority of its growth is based on babies being born. So you could stop immigration 100%. That does not mean you're going to stop Latino population growth. And I showed you those two cohorts, 0 to 4 and 5 to 9. And so for the next 20, 30, 40 years, the Latino population is not only going to grow, but it's going to grow at an exponential rate, regardless of what happens to immigration. So Latino population growth has been decoupled from the immigration experience. We see different social economic transitions for different ethnic groups. Latino immigrants, the majority of Latinos are native born. And so if we look at those who are being born, these are American born citizens. And so that's very different growth that's happening compared to what happened in the 1980s and 1990s, where the Mexican immigrant population and did contribute to a lot of the growth that were there. And then 3 out of 4 of the Latinos live in the suburbs in the St. Louis metropolitan region. And so this is kind of unique to St. Louis. That if we look at other metropolitan regions, we still see large concentrations of Latinos in the core of the city. But with St. Louis, we see that it's really located, the burgeoning growth is really located now in the suburbs. And we'll see what the next year looks like. But I think it's fair to say that the Latino population in St. Louis is a suburban population. And this kind of corresponds to other research that we've been doing that looks at economic activity and new economic activity. We see that it's popping up in the suburbs at a larger rate compared to what's happening in the city of St. Louis. And with that, that's my 22 minutes. I want to thank you again for inviting me to share briefly some statistics. If you have any questions or would like a copy of this PowerPoint, just send me an email and I'm happy to share this with you.
Thank you so much, Ness. This is so important. And of course, the Aztec power is winning apparently because we have a lot of kids, what is really good.
Yep.
We're still growing the population. And this is really important. That's why now with this uncertain times changing and with this pandemic, we need to get together. It's not just like we are from Puerto Rico, from Mexico, El Salvador. We are all of us one. No, see ourselves as one. Any other comment that you have regarding this important?
So I think the point that I would make, I think we're still in this COVID period. And so we're trying to get a sense of what the trends are. But I think invite me back next year and we'll have some new numbers. But I think what's going to happen with COVID is that we're going to see the U.S. population continue to decline a little bit in terms of more fertility, but it's going to impact the white population more than the Latino population. And so as a demographer, we're trying to get a picture into the future. That's my goal. It's interesting to talk about what's happening now, but what we're really trying to understand, what's the United States going to look like in 2040, 2050? And so we know that based on our projections pre-COVID, around 2060, the Latino population would be about 115 million residents, and the white population would be like 125,000, something like 125 million. I think all those projections are going to be questionable now. And so it is possible that the Latino and white population may actually be equal to each other in 2060. I know it's hard to talk about 2070, 2075 because most of us will be in our graves. Around 2075, I think when we look at my children, they're going to be about 55 at that age now. It's possible right around 25 Latinos will outnumber whites in the United States. Wow. And so when I talk about what the implications are, I started as a little joke, but I think I'm actually professionally making this prediction. You're seeing cultural changes happen, and one of them is going to be the Inyan. And I'm making a prediction that the Inyan is going to be part of the English alphabet because it's being used so much as an English letter now. It's just, so I think with a lot of cultures, they just got rid of these special characters and said, we're just going to pronounce it like this. But what I'm seeing, I've been taking pictures every time I go out and saying, look here's a mainstream product that's being sold to Americans, and they're keeping the Enya now. So I know, I would say somewhere around 2050, there'll be an announcement that'll be made saying we're going to be changing the American alphabet, and Enya is going to be the new alphabet. It's going to be the new letter in the American alphabet. And that's simply coming from the demographic forces of Latinos maintaining their language, because Enya is very different than N, right? And so it can be absorbed the way that it got absorbed 40 or 50 years ago with other European characters. And so I think it's going to be things like that we're going to start seeing change. Even we're seeing a lot of Spanish words become English words. And so like fiesta is an English word, right? Guacamole is an English word.
Yeah.
Most people count in Spanish 1 to 10 and don't even think twice about it, right? Baño is an English word.
Right.
Año is an English word. Feliz is an English word. So people are speaking more and more Spanish as though these are English words. So I always joke, 100 years from now, the English that's going to be spoken in the United States will be very different than the English that's spoken in England, because it's absorbing so many Spanish words as though it's English.
Amazing.
And so you see it happening. I watch my videos, they're like, ocho people swallow, and I see it. I can see it. For them, it's natural.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. We would love to be all talking to you. We are coming with the next beautiful presentation that we are having here. Tony Maldonado is coming in 3 more minutes. Gracias. Gracias, Ness. And
Gracias. Adiós.
Bye. Bueno, pues